Right now, your mind is running dozens of psychological programs designed to manipulate your thoughts and decisions. The scariest part? You cannot turn them off. You think you chose to click on this video, but what if that choice was an illusion? Your mind is playing a sophisticated game with you, creating your reality moment by moment while convincing you that you are in control. This is not mystical theory. This is documented psychology. Your brain is running background programs right now that were installed before you could consent to them. Most people live their entire lives without discovering this. They mistake the puppet show for reality. Tonight, we are going behind the curtain. But here is the first dark truth. Knowing about these psychological tricks does not free you from them. So why learn about it at all? Because once you understand how the game works, you stop taking it so seriously. Over the next few minutes, we will explore the psychological manipulation your mind uses to construct your reality. Have you ever wondered why you cannot just decide to be happy and then be happy? The answer lies in understanding that you, the conscious deciding you, are not who you think you are. You are more like a passenger on a ship, convinced you are the captain because someone handed you a toy steering wheel. The real captain? That is your unconscious mind. Let us meet the real captain, shall we? You think you are choosing to listen to this video, but that decision was made by psychological forces you are not even aware of. Right now, you think you are choosing to keep listening, but that decision was made 10 seconds ago by parts of your mind you cannot access. Let us start with the most fundamental psychological trick your mind plays on you, the illusion that you are in control of your thoughts, decisions, and actions. Right now, I want you to try something. Do not think about a white elephant. Just for the next seconds, make sure the image of a white elephant does not appear in your mind. How did that go? If you are like most people, the moment I said, "Do not think about a white elephant," that is exactly what appeared in your consciousness. You could not stop it, could not control it. And this reveals something profound about the nature of your mind. The part of you that thinks it is in control is not actually driving the bus. This is not just a parlor trick. It is a window into how your psychological reality actually works. Thoughts appear in your consciousness without your permission. Emotions arise without your consent. Decisions form in the depths of your mind before your conscious awareness even knows they are being made. Scientists have proven this in laboratories. They can predict which decision you will make up to 10 seconds before you become consciously aware that you have decided anything. 10 seconds. That is an eternity in brain time. Your unconscious mind is choosing, processing, and committing to actions while your conscious mind is still pretending to weigh options. But here's where it gets really dark. Your mind then creates an elaborate story about how you made that decision. It generates reasons, justifications, and explanations that feel absolutely convincing. It tells you a story about your agency, your choice, your control, and you believe it completely. This is called confabulation, and your brain does it constantly. It is not lying exactly. It genuinely believes the stories it creates about your motivations and decisions. But these stories are constructed after the fact. Like a defense attorney building a case for a client who has already been convicted. Think about the last time you made what felt like a difficult decision. Maybe choosing what to eat, where to live, or whether to stay in a relationship. You probably remember weighing the pros and cons, considering different factors, maybe even making lists. You felt like you were actively choosing, but neuroscience suggests something different happened. Your unconscious mind had already begun moving toward a decision based on factors you were not consciously aware of. Past experiences, emotional associations, biochemical states, environmental cues. Your conscious mind then observed this process and created a narrative about making a choice. The decision was making itself. You were just along for the ride. This extends to everything. The career you think you chose? It chose you through a series of unconscious attractions, aversions, and circumstantial factors that felt like personal agency. The person you fell in love with? That was biochemistry and psychological patterning selecting a target, not your conscious preference system making a rational evaluation. Even your thoughts about what I am saying right now, whether you agree, disagree, or feel resistant, these responses are arising automatically based on your psychological programming. You are not choosing to think these thoughts. They are thinking themselves through you. This is terrifying for most people to consider because our entire sense of self is built on the assumption of personal agency. We need to believe we are the authors of our lives, the captains of our souls, the masters of our fate. The alternative, that we are sophisticated biological machines running pre-programmed responses, feels like it negates everything we consider meaningful about human existence. But here's the paradox. Recognizing the illusion of control does not make you more controlled. It actually makes you more free. When you stop exhausting yourself trying to control what was never controllable in the first place, you can begin to work with your psychological machinery instead of against it. You cannot control what thoughts arise, but you can learn to observe them without being enslaved by them. You cannot control what emotions surface, but you can develop a different relationship to them. You cannot control the unconscious factors that influence your decisions, but you can become more aware of them. The mind that is trying to control everything is the same mind that is creating the illusion of control. It is like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own bootstraps. The harder you try, the more evidence you create of your powerlessness. But when you stop trying to control your mind and start watching it instead, something interesting happens. The watching itself becomes a form of freedom, not the freedom to control, but the freedom to see clearly. And clear seeing changes everything. Even though you are not trying to change anything, your mind will resist this idea. Right now, it is probably generating reasons why this does not apply to you, why your situation is different, why you really are in control of your important decisions. That resistance is just another automatic response, another program running without your permission. Notice it. Do not fight it. Do not try to control it. Just watch it do what it does. Because in the next section, we are going deeper. We are going to explore how your mind is not just creating the illusion of control, it is creating the illusion of reality itself. Everything you think you see, hear, an experience is being constructed by psychological processes that hide their own operation. Your brain is hallucinating your entire world, and it is doing everything possible to make sure you never find out. Your brain is hallucinating your entire reality and doing everything possible to hide this from you. Here is something that will fundamentally disturb how you think about your own experience. You have never seen the world. You have only seen your brain's interpretation of electrical signals that may or may not correspond to something out there. Everything you call reality, the room you are in, the device you are listening on, the sound of my voice is a construction project happening inside your skull. Your brain is taking raw sensory data and building a coherent experience from it. But that experience is more like a sophisticated virtual reality simulation than a direct perception of what exists. And here's the unsettling part. Your brain is really good at hiding this from you. Right now, you are probably looking around and thinking, no, I am directly seeing my environment. I am not hallucinating anything. But consider this. You have a blind spot in each eye where your optic nerve connects to your retina. It is about the size of your thumb held at arm's length. You cannot see anything in that area. It is literally invisible to you. So why are you not aware of two black holes in your vision right now? Because your brain fills them in. It looks at the surrounding areas and makes educated guesses about what should be there. It paints in the missing information so seamlessly that you never notice the gaps. Your brain is photoshopping your reality in real time, and it never tells you it is doing it. This is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. Your brain is not trying to show you what is actually there. It is trying to create a useful model of reality that helps you survive and function. And useful does not always mean accurate. Your visual system completely inverts the image coming through your eyes, then flips it back to create the illusion of an upright world. It adjusts colors based on context. The same wavelength of light will appear completely different depending on what surrounds it. It creates the sensation of smooth motion from a series of static snapshots, like frames in a movie. But vision is just the beginning. Your brain constructs your entire sensory reality. The sound you are hearing right now is not sound. It is pressure waves in air that your auditory system converts into the experience of hearing. The feeling of your body is not direct sensation. It is your brain's best guess about where your limbs are and what they are touching based on incomplete and often contradictory information. Even time is constructed. Your brain takes events that happen at slightly different moments and synchronizes them to create the illusion of simultaneity. It predicts where moving objects will be by the time your visual processing catches up. It literally shows you the future while convincing you it is the present. And all of this construction happens below the threshold of consciousness. You do not experience the process. You only experience the finished product. It is like watching a movie and seeing the final edited version without any awareness of the cameras, the lighting, the post-production, or the hundreds of decisions that shaped what you are seeing. But here is where it gets psychologically dark. Your brain does not just construct your external reality. It constructs your internal reality too. Your thoughts, emotions, memories, and sense of self are all construction projects, happening in the same neural machinery that builds your perception of the outside world. That feeling you have of being a continuous, unified self moving through time, that is constructed. Your brain takes disparate mental processes, it's memory, sensation, emotion, planning, and weaves them into a narrative of selfhood. It creates the experience of being you from components that have no inherent unity. Your emotional reality is constructed. What you call feelings are your brain's interpretations of bodily sensations, contextual cues, and past associations. The same physical arousal can be interpreted as excitement or anxiety, depending on the story your brain tells about what is happening. Your memory is constructed. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds that memory from fragments, filling in gaps with current knowledge and expectations. You are not retrieving a file. You are reconstructing an experience, and each reconstruction changes the memory for next time. Even your sense of free will is constructed. Your brain observes your own behavior and creates explanations for why you did what you did. It generates the feeling of intention, the sense of choosing, the experience of willing actions into existence. But these are post hoc constructions, narratives created to make sense of processes that are largely unconscious. This means that everything you think you know about yourself and your world is mediated by psychological processes that operate like a sophisticated graphics engine. Your mind is rendering reality moment by moment, making countless automatic decisions about what to include, what to emphasize, what to ignore, and how to present it all as a coherent experience. And the most sophisticated part of this construction project? It creates the illusion that no construction is taking place. It makes the rendered reality feel immediate, direct, and unmediated. It hides its own operation so completely that questioning the authenticity of your experience feels absurd. But once you begin to see the construction process, you cannot unsee it. You start to notice the gaps that get filled in, the predictions that get presented as perceptions, the interpretations that masquerade as facts. You begin to realize that you are living inside a very convincing simulation of reality rather than reality itself. This is not nihilistic or depressing. It is actually profound. It means that the boundaries between imagination and perception, between dream and waking, between self and world, are much more fluid than you ever realized. It means that changing your reality is not about changing what is out there. It is about understanding and working with the construction processes that create your experience. Your brain is hallucinating your reality, but it is a collaborative hallucination. And once you understand how the collaboration works, you can begin to participate more consciously in the process. In our next section, we are going to explore one of the most disturbing aspects of this construction project: how your brain edits and rewrites your memories without your knowledge or permission. Every time you remember your past, you are changing it. And you have no idea how much of your personal history is fiction. Every time you remember something, you're changing it.
How?
Your mind is rewriting your past in real time. What if I told you that your most vivid, most precious memories, the ones that define who you are and where you came from, are largely fiction? Not complete fiction, but heavily edited, reconstructed, and contaminated versions of events that may have happened very differently than you remember. Every time you recall something from your past, your brain doesn't retrieve a stored file, rebuilds that memory from fragments, and in the process of rebuilding, it changes it. This isn't a flaw in your memory system. It's how memory is designed to work. And your brain has been rewriting your personal history since the moment you started forming memories. Let me show you how this works. Think of a memory from your childhood, maybe a birthday party, a family vacation, or your first day of school. As you recall it now, it probably feels vivid and accurate. You can see details, hear sounds, maybe even smell certain scents. The memory feels like a recording of what actually happened. But here's what's actually occurring in your brain. You're taking fragments of that original experience, some visual snippets, some emotional impressions, some contextual information. And you're combining them with everything you've learned since then. Your current knowledge, your current beliefs about yourself, your current emotional state. Each time you remember something, you're not just accessing it, you're rewriting it. The memory you have of that childhood birthday is unteam the same memory you had of it 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or even the last time you thought about it. Psychologists have demonstrated this in hundreds of studies. It can implant entirely false memories that feel completely real to the people who have them. They can make you remember getting lost in a shopping mall as a child, even if it never happened. They can convince you that you saw footage of 9/11 that was never actually broadcast. But your brain doesn't need psychologists to manipulate your memories. It's doing this manipulation constantly, automatically, invisibly. Your memories are contaminated by your expectations. If you believe something should have happened a certain way, your brain will gradually edit your memories to match that expectation. Your memories are contaminated by your emotions. If you're angry at someone now, your brain will retrieve memories of that person that support your current emotional state. Your memories are contaminated by other people's stories. When family members tell stories about shared experiences, details from their version can migrate into your memory without you noticing. Your memories are even contaminated by your imagination. Every time you imagine how something might have happened differently, some of those imagined elements can become incorporated into the memory itself. This means that your sense of personal identity, which is largely built on your memories, is constructed from unreliable material. The story you tell yourself about your life, the narrative that explains how you became who you are, is based on heavily edited and frequently fictional recollections. That difficult childhood that shaped your personality, some of it probably happened, but how much and in what way is impossible to know. Those formative relationships that taught you about love and trust, they're filtered through decades of subsequent experiences and psychological development. This is psychologically disturbing because we use our memories not just to understand our past, but to predict our future. We make decisions based on what we think we learned from previous experiences. We avoid situations that remind us of past pain. We seek situations that remind us of past pleasure. But if our memories of those experiences have been systematically altered, then our entire decision-making framework is built on a foundation of reconstructed fiction. And here's the most unsettling part. There's no way to know which of your memories are accurate and which have been altered. The false ones feel just as real as the true ones. The edited ones carry the same emotional weight as the originals. This creates a profound philosophical problem. If your memories are unreliable, and your sense of self is built on your memories, then who are you really? Are you the person who actually lived those experiences, or are you the person who remembers having lived them? But here's where this gets psychologically interesting rather than just disturbing. Once you understand that your memories are constrictions rather than recordings, you begin to realize that you have more influence over your past than you thought. If your brain is going to edit your memories anyway, you can begin to participate more consciously in that editing process. You can choose which aspects of experiences to focus on when you recall them. You can deliberately cultivate memories that serve your psychological well-being. This doesn't mean creating false memories or denying difficult experiences. It means understanding that the meaning you extract from your past is always a construction. Your past isn't fixed. It's being continuously recreated by your present consciousness. And your present consciousness is being shaped by your reconstructed past. It's a feedback loop of identity creation that never stops running. In our next section, we're going to explore how this reconstruction process extends beyond memory into the very core of who you think you are. Your personality, that stable, consistent sense of self that feels so solid and unchanging, is actually a collection of responses to other people's expectations. You're not who you think you are. You're who you think other people think you are. The self you think you know is a collection of responses to other people's expectations. Who are you when nobody is watching? Most people can't answer this question because they've never actually met themselves outside of social context. What you call your personality, your likes, dislikes, values, behaviors, even your core sense of identity is largely a collection of learned responses to other people's expectations, judgments, and reactions. You think you have a fixed personality, but what you actually have is a repertoire of social performances that have become so automatic you mistake them for your authentic self. Watch yourself carefully over the next few days. Notice how you become a slightly different person with your family versus your friends versus your colleagues versus strangers. Notice how your voice changes, your posture shifts, your interests fluctuate. Even your opinions adapt depending on who's in the room. This isn't being fake or dishonest. This is how personality actually works. You're not a fixed entity expressing yourself through different situations. You're a dynamic system, creating different versions of yourself in response to different social environments. But here's the psychological trap. Over time, these social performances become internalized. You start to believe that the responses you've learned to get approval, avoid rejection, or manage other people's reactions are actually who you are. You begin to identify with patterns of behavior that were originally just strategies for navigating social relationships. Think about the traits you consider most essentially you. Are you funny? That might have started as a way to deflect tension or get attention. Are you responsible? It could have been learned to avoid disappointing authority figures. Are you independent? That might be a reaction to feeling smothered or controlled. Are you agreeable? That could be a strategy for avoiding conflict. None of these responses are inherently bad, but they become problematic when you mistake them for your true nature rather than recognizing them as learned patterns. You end up trapped in a personality that was constructed by your social environment rather than chosen by your authentic self. This process starts incredibly early. Before you could even speak, you were learning which expressions got positive responses and which ones didn't. You discovered that certain ways of being were rewarded with attention, affection, and approval, while others led to rejection, punishment, or indifference. Your developing brain, desperate for connection and survival, began organizing itself around getting the positive responses and avoiding the negative ones. It learned to amplify the parts of your natural temperament that worked socially and suppress the parts that didn't. Over years of this conditioning, you developed what felt like a stable personality, but was actually a highly sophisticated system for managing other people's reactions to you. The most insidious part of this process is that it happens largely outside conscious awareness. You don't remember making the decision to become more outgoing to please your extroverted parents, or to become more serious to match your family's values, or to become more rebellious to differentiate yourself from your siblings. These adaptations happen automatically, and by the time you're old enough to reflect on your personality, the patterns feel natural and chosen. But they weren't chosen, they were conditioned. And conditioning that runs deep enough becomes indistinguishable from identity. This creates a profound psychological problem. You end up living a life designed to maintain a personality that was constructed by people and circumstances from your past. You make decisions, pursue goals, and build relationships that support your learned sense of self. Even when that self no longer serves you or reflects who you might naturally be. You stay in jobs that reinforce your identity as a responsible person, even if the work drains you. You maintain friendships that depend on you being the funny one, even if you're tired of performing. You avoid opportunities that might challenge your self-concept, even if they could lead to growth and fulfillment. The personality becomes a prison because you start protecting it like it's something precious and real, rather than recognizing it as a set of learned responses that can be modified or abandoned. And here's where it gets really twisted. Other people participate in maintaining your personality prison. They expect you to be consistent with their image of who you are. They reward you for staying in character and express discomfort when you deviate from their expectations. Family members, friends, and colleagues all have investments in you remaining the person they think they know. This creates a social web of mutual personality maintenance. Everyone is helping everyone else stay trapped in their learned patterns of being, while believing they're just being authentic and relating to each other's true selves. Breaking out of this prison requires recognizing that personality is much more fluid and optional than you've been led to believe. It means experimenting with different ways of being, and seeing what emerges when you're not trying to maintain a consistent image. It means disappointing people's expectations of who you should be in order to discover who you might actually be. But this is terrifying for most people because it threatens the entire foundation of their identity. If your personality isn't your true self, then who are you really? If the traits you've identified with aren't authentic, then what is? These are the right questions to be asking. But they're not questions that can be answered through thinking or analysis. They can only be explored through experimenting with new ways of being and seeing what feels genuinely alive rather than socially constructed. The irony is that most people spend their lives trying to find themselves while carrying around a predetermined idea of who they think they should find. They're looking for their authentic self while remaining committed to maintaining their conditioned personality. True authenticity might not be about discovering some fixed, essential self that's been hiding beneath social conditioning. It might be about recognizing that you're a creative, dynamic process rather than a fixed entity, and learning to participate more consciously in that process of continuous self-creation. In a few minutes, I'll show you why your anxiety about tomorrow is actually a 50,000-year-old survival program that thinks you're about to be eaten by predators. Your emotions aren't responding to now. They're responding to evolutionary threats that no longer exist. Your emotional system is running on 50,000-year-old software in a 21st century environment. And this ancient programming is hijacking your daily experience with reactions designed for survival situations that rarely exist in modern life. Right now, as you listen to this, your nervous system is scanning for threats that killed your ancestors but can't actually harm you. It's preparing you for physical dangers while you face psychological challenges. It's flooding you with stress hormones designed for life or death situations while you deal with emails, social media, and relationship conflicts. This isn't a design flaw. It's an evolutionary mismatch. Your emotional system evolved in an environment where threats were immediate, physical, and temporary. A predator would either catch you or you'd escape. A rival would either defeat you or retreat. Food would either be available or scarce. The emotional responses that kept your ancestors alive were perfectly calibrated for that world. But you don't live in that world anymore. In your modern environment, threats are often psychological, social, and persistent. Yet your emotional system still responds as if every workplace criticism is a physical attack. Every social rejection is expulsion from the tribe. Every uncertainty about the future is imminent starvation. Your anxiety isn't responding to the actual probability of danger in your current situation. It's responding to the ancient possibility that letting your guard down could be fatal. Your anger isn't proportional to the actual harm someone has caused you. It's calibrated for situations where showing weakness could get you killed. Your depression isn't reflecting the actual hopelessness of your circumstances. It's an ancient conservation response designed for times when resources were truly scarce. Watch this mismatch play out in your daily life. You get anxious about a presentation at work, and your body prepares as if you're about to fight for your life. Your heart races, your muscles tense, stress hormones flood your system. All perfectly appropriate responses if you were actually facing mortal danger, but completely excessive for speaking to colleagues. You feel rejected by someone's lack of response to a text message, and your emotional system reacts as if you've been cast out of your survival group. The loneliness, the hurt, the desperate need for reconnection. These responses make sense if social rejection literally meant death, but they're wildly disproportionate to someone not texting you back. You encounter uncertainty about your financial future, and your brain activates the same panic circuits that would fire if you were facing actual famine. The worry, the obsessive planning, the inability to relax. These would be useful if you were literally struggling to find your next meal, but they're counterproductive when applied to modern economic complexity. This emotional hijacking happens because your ancient brain doesn't distinguish between actual threats and symbolic ones, between physical danger and psychological discomfort, between immediate problems and imagined future scenarios. It's operating on simple rules. Uncertainty equals danger. Social disapproval equals death. Any challenge to status equals survival threat. But here's where it gets psychologically twisted. You interpret these ancient emotional reactions as meaningful information about your current life. You think your anxiety is telling you something important about your actual risk level? You believe your anger reveals something significant about the injustice you're facing. You assume your depression reflects the objective hopelessness of your situation. But what if these emotions are just evolutionary echoes, outdated responses that have little to do with your actual circumstances? This doesn't mean your emotions are meaningless or that you should ignore them. But it does mean that the intensity and urgency of your emotional reactions are often wildly inappropriate for the situations that trigger them. Your emotional system is like a smoke detector that goes off every time you cook dinner. Technically functioning as designed, but not well calibrated for your current environment. Understanding this mismatch can be profoundly liberating. When you feel overwhelmed by anxiety, you can recognize that your nervous system is preparing you for threats that aren't actually present. When you're consumed by anger, you can see that your emotional system is calibrated for physical confrontations that aren't going to happen. When you're sunk in depression, you can understand that your brain is running conservation protocols designed for resource scarcity that doesn't exist. This recognition doesn't make the emotions disappear, but it changes your relationship to them. Instead of taking them as accurate assessments of your situation, you can see them as ancient programs running inappropriate subroutines. Instead of being overwhelmed by their intensity, you can appreciate them as evolutionary artifacts that don't always apply to modern life. You can learn to respond to your emotions the way you might respond to a car alarm going off in a safe neighborhood, acknowledging the signal while recognizing that it's probably a false alarm. But your ancient emotional system has one more trick up its sleeve, and it's perhaps the most sophisticated psychological manipulation of all. It doesn't just create inappropriate emotional reactions. It creates the illusion that you're thinking rationally when you're actually being driven by these unconscious programs. Your rational mind, That part of you that believes it's making logical decisions based on objective analysis, is actually a sophisticated rationalization engine. It takes the emotional impulses generated by your ancient brain and creates elaborate logical justifications for them. You don't decide to be angry and then find reasons for your anger. You become angry first, and then your rational mind constructs a case for why that anger is justified. You don't analyze a situation and conclude you should be anxious. You become anxious first, and then your thinking mind finds evidence to support that anxiety. Your emotions are driving the bus, but your rational mind thinks it's navigating. In our next section, we're going to explore this logic deception in depth. How your thinking mind, the part of you that feels most reliable and trustworthy, is actually a master of sophisticated self-justification. You think you're rational, but you're actually running elaborate psychological programs designed to make your irrational responses feel perfectly reasonable. You think you're rational, but you're actually a master of sophisticated self-justification. Your rational mind, that voice in your head that weighs evidence, considers options, and makes logical decisions, is not what you think it is. It's not an objective analyzer of reality. It's a lawyer for your unconscious mind, building cases to justify decisions that have already been made by processes you're not aware of. And it's so good at this job that it has convinced you that you're a rational being making conscious choices based on careful consideration of facts. Here's how the deception works. Your unconscious mind, driven by emotions, instincts, social conditioning, and evolutionary programming, generates impulses, preferences, and reactions. Then your conscious, rational mind, observing these impulses after they arise, constructs elaborate logical explanations for why they make perfect sense. You don't reason your way to most conclusions. You feel your way there, then reverse engineer the reasoning. Think about the last time you made what felt like a carefully reasoned decision. Maybe choosing where to live, what job to take, or whether to end a relationship. You probably remember weighing pros and cons, considering various factors, maybe even making lists. You felt like you were being rational and thorough. But neuroscience suggests something very different was happening. Your unconscious mind had already begun moving toward a decision based on factors you weren't consciously processing. How the options made you feel, what they reminded you of, how they fit with your self-image, what social approval they might generate. Your rational mind then observed this unconscious movement and created a logical framework to justify it. The reasoning felt like it was driving the decision, but it was actually following behind, cleaning up the paperwork. This process is so automatic and convincing that you experience it as pure logic. The justifications your mind creates feel like genuine analysis rather than after-the-fact rationalization. You believe you chose the apartment because of the commute and the price, when you actually chose it because of how it made you feel and then found logical reasons to support that feeling. Watch this happening in your daily life. Notice how quickly your mind generates reasons for your preferences. You don't like a particular person, and immediately you can list logical reasons why they're problematic. You're attracted to someone, and suddenly you can articulate all their admirable qualities. You want to buy something, and you can instantly construct a rational argument for why you need it. But here's the test. How often do these logical reasons lead you to change your initial reaction? If your reasoning were actually driving your decisions, you should frequently talk yourself out of your first impulses. Instead, you almost always find ways to justify what you were already inclined to do. This is because your rational mind isn't designed to override your unconscious impulses. It's designed to make them socially acceptable and personally coherent. It's not trying to find the truth. It's trying to create a story that maintains your self-image as a reasonable person making sensible choices. And it's incredibly sophisticated at this task. It can take the most irrational emotional reaction and construct a framework of logic around it that feels completely convincing. It can transform personal preferences into universal principles, unconscious biases into objective observations, social conditioning into moral convictions. Your political beliefs, for instance, probably feel like the result of careful consideration of evidence and principles. But research shows that people's political orientations are largely determined by unconscious factors. Personality traits, social identity, emotional temperament, even genetic predispositions. Your rational mind, then, selects and interprets information to support positions that were determined by processes you're not aware of. The same pattern applies to your moral judgments, your aesthetic preferences, your career choices, your relationship decisions, even your philosophical beliefs about the nature of reality. Your unconscious mind generates reactions based on deep programming, and your rational mind creates logical-sounding explanations for those reactions. This doesn't mean reasoning is useless or that logic doesn't matter. But it does mean that most of what you experience as rational thought is actually sophisticated rationalization. You're not an objective analyzer of reality. You're a meaning-making machine that creates coherent stories about decisions that were made by processes operating below the threshold of consciousness. And here's the most psychologically twisted part. The better you are at rationalization, the more convinced you become of your own rationality. The more elaborate and internally consistent your justifications become, the more certain you feel that you're thinking clearly and objectively. Intelligence, in this context, often becomes a tool for more sophisticated self-deception rather than clearer perception of reality. Highly intelligent people aren't less susceptible to cognitive biases and emotional reasoning. They're just better at creating convincing explanations for their biased and emotional responses. This creates a paradox. The more confidence you have in your rational thinking, the more likely it is that you're being fooled by your own rationalization process. True rationality might actually require more humility about the reliability of your reasoning than most people are comfortable with. But recognizing the logic deception can be liberating in unexpected ways. When you stop believing that your thoughts and preferences are the products of pure logic, you can begin to examine the unconscious forces that actually drive them. When you recognize that your mind is constantly creating post hoc justifications, you can start to question those justifications more skillfully. You can begin to ask different questions. Not, is this logical, but what am I trying to justify? Not, what does the evidence suggest, but what do I want the evidence to suggest? Not, am I being rational, but what emotional or social needs is my rationality serving? This kind of inquiry can reveal the hidden motivations behind your thoughts and decisions. Motivations that were invisible as long as you believed your rational mind was in charge. And understanding your real motivations gives you more genuine choice about how to respond to them. But even this level of self-awareness has its limits, because the motivations behind your motivations are often unconscious too. The drives that feel most personal and authentic to you, your deepest desires, your core values, your fundamental sense of what matters, these aren't necessarily yours in the way you imagine. The reasons you think you do things are almost never the real reasons you do them. You tell yourself you work late because you're dedicated to your career. But the real reason might be that you're avoiding an empty apartment that reminds you of a loneliness you don't want to feel. You tell yourself you're being ambitious, but you might actually be running from something else entirely. This is the motivation maze, the gap between the reasons you give yourself for your actions and the actual forces driving your behavior. Your conscious mind creates elegant stories about your motivations. But these stories are usually just the top layer of a much deeper and more complex psychological system. Right now, think about why you're listening to this. You probably have a clear answer. You're interested in psychology, you want to understand yourself better, you're curious about the mind. These feel like genuine, authentic motivations. But what if the real reason you're here has nothing to do with intellectual curiosity? What if you're actually seeking a sense of superiority, the feeling of knowing something others don't? What if you're avoiding something else you should be doing? What if you're trying to solve a personal problem indirectly by learning about psychology in general? The unsettling truth is that you probably don't know. The drives that feel most authentic and personal to you are often the ones you understand least. Your conscious motivations, the reasons you can articulate and defend, are like the visible part of an iceberg. They're real, but they're supported by a massive structure of unconscious drives that you can't see and rarely examine. These hidden motivations were installed by evolution, shaped by your early experiences, and reinforced by years of unconscious learning. Consider the person who says they exercise for health reasons. That's their conscious motivation, and it feels genuine. But beneath that surface explanation might be a desperate need for control in a life that feels chaotic, or a fear of aging that connects to deeper anxieties about death, or a way of managing depression that they don't want to acknowledge, or even a form of socially acceptable self-punishment rooted in shame they can't articulate. The health motivation isn't false, it's just incomplete. It's the story their conscious mind tells to make sense of behavior that's actually driven by forces they don't want to examine. This pattern repeats across every area of human behavior. The parent who says they're strict because they want their children to succeed might actually be recreating the only form of love they learned to recognize. The person who claims they're generous because they care about others might be buying emotional insurance against their own fear of being unloved. The individual who pursues wealth for security might be trying to fill a void that no amount of money can actually address. None of these people are lying exactly. They genuinely believe their conscious motivations, but they're operating from a kind of psychological tunnel vision that only sees the acceptable, socially appropriate layer of their drive system. Your mind protects you from seeing these deeper motivations because many of them are uncomfortable or socially unacceptable. It's easier to believe you're driven by noble purposes than to acknowledge that you might be driven by fear, insecurity, unresolved trauma, or primitive social needs. But this protection comes at a cost. When you don't understand your real motivations, you can't make conscious choices about them. You end up pursuing goals that don't actually satisfy the needs driving you, creating solutions that don't address the problems they're meant to solve. The person exercising for health, but actually seeking control, will never feel satisfied, no matter how fit they become. The parent being strict to show love will never feel connected to their children, no matter how successful the children become. The generous person buying emotional insurance will never feel truly loved, no matter how much they give. They're trying to solve the wrong problem because they don't understand what problem they're actually trying to solve. This creates a frustrating psychological loop. You pursue conscious goals driven by unconscious needs. But because the goals don't match the needs, you never feel satisfied. So you pursue the goals more intensely, which still doesn't satisfy the real needs, which drives even more intense pursuit. The ambitious person who's actually running from feelings of inadequacy will never achieve enough to feel adequate. The social person who's actually avoiding being alone with themselves will never have enough friends to feel comfortable with solitude. The perfectionist who is actually trying to avoid criticism will never be perfect enough to feel safe from judgment. Understanding your hidden motivations isn't about judging them or trying to eliminate them. Many of these unconscious drives serve important psychological functions, even if they're not the ones you think you're serving. The key is developing enough self-awareness to see the real motivation alongside the conscious one. When you can acknowledge that you work late partly to avoid loneliness, you can make more conscious choices about how to address that loneliness. When you can see that your generosity is partly motivated by fear, you can find healthier ways to manage that fear. When you can recognize that your ambition is partly driven by inadequacy, you can work on the inadequacy directly instead of trying to achieve your way out of it. But here's the deeper layer of this psychological maze. Even when you think you've discovered your real motivations, you've often just found another story. The fear of loneliness might be driven by early attachment patterns. The feelings of inadequacy might stem from evolutionary status anxieties. The need for control might be rooted in childhood experiences of powerlessness. Your motivations have motivations, and those motivations have motivations, stretching back through layers of personal history, evolutionary programming, and unconscious conditioning that you'll probably never fully untangle. This isn't meant to be discouraging, it's meant to be liberating. When you stop believing that you fully understand why you do what you do, you become more curious about your own behavior. When you recognize that your conscious motivations are just the beginning of the story, you can start asking more interesting questions. Instead of asking, "Why do I want this?" you can ask, "What need am I trying to meet through wanting this?" Instead of, "Am I being rational?" you can ask, "What would make this choice feel necessary to some part of me?" Instead of defending your motivations, you can explore them. This kind of psychological archaeology can reveal patterns you never noticed, needs you never acknowledged, and possibilities you never considered. But it requires giving up the comforting illusion that you're a transparent, rational actor who understands their own drives. You think you're thinking your own thoughts, but most of them were installed by others before you could resist. Right now, as you form opinions about what I'm saying, you think those thoughts are yours. But what if I told you that the voice in your head, the one that agrees, disagrees, analyzes, and judges, is largely a collection of other people's thoughts that were programmed into you before you developed the capacity to examine or resist them? You think you have your own mind, but what you actually have is a sophisticated social programming system that creates the illusion of independent thought. While running on code written by parents, teachers, peers, media, and culture, this programming started before you could speak. Your developing brain was desperately trying to figure out how to survive in a social environment, and it learned by copying, absorbing, and internalizing the mental patterns of the people around you. But here's the crucial part. This wasn't conscious learning. You weren't choosing which ideas to adopt. You were automatically downloading entire systems of thought, belief, and reaction. Watch a child develop language, and you'll see this process in action. They don't just learn words, they absorb the emotional associations, the value judgments, the unspoken assumptions that come with those words. When parents say money with anxiety, children learn that money is something to worry about. When families discuss certain topics in hushed tones, children learn those topics are dangerous or shameful. but it goes far deeper than vocabulary. Children absorb entire frameworks for understanding reality. What matters and what doesn't. What's possible and what isn't. What's normal and what's strange. What's good and what's bad. They internalize these frameworks so completely that they mistake them for objective truth rather than recognizing them as one family's particular way of seeing the world. By the time you're old enough to think critically about these inherited mental programs, they've become invisible. They're not ideas you have. They're the lens through which you see ideas. They're not beliefs you hold. They're the foundation upon which you build other beliefs. Consider your political opinions. They probably feel like the result of careful consideration of evidence and principles. But research shows that political orientations are largely determined by the social environment you grew up in, your family's values, your peer group's assumptions, and even your psychological temperament. Your rational mind then selects information that confirms these inherited orientations, while filtering out information that challenges them. You're not thinking your way to political conclusions. You're justifying positions that were programmed into you by your social environment, then reinforced by choosing information sources that echo those same positions back to you. This pattern extends to virtually everything you think of as your personal beliefs. Your ideas about success, relationships, morality, spirituality, even your preferences in art, music, and lifestyle. Most of these weren't chosen by you. They were installed by your social programming, and then reinforced by surrounding yourself with people and media that reflect those same programs back to you. But here's where it gets psychologically sophisticated. You don't just internalize other people's thoughts, you internalize their voices. The running commentary in your mind, the one that evaluates your choices and judges your behavior, is largely composed of internalized voices from your past. That critical voice that tells you you're not working hard enough, that might be your father's voice. Downloaded during childhood and now running automatically in your adult mind. The anxious voice that warns you about potential dangers. That could be your mother's worry patterns installed so early that you experience them as your own intuition. The perfectionist voice that's never satisfied with your efforts. The people-pleasing voice that prioritizes others' comfort over your own needs. The rebellious voice that automatically resists authority. These aren't necessarily your authentic responses. They're often internalized programs from people who were trying to shape your behavior. When you were too young to choose whether you wanted to be shaped, and here's the most disturbing part. You use other people as mirrors to avoid seeing these programs clearly. You surround yourself with friends who share your inherited assumptions. You consume media that confirms your programmed beliefs. You choose romantic partners who trigger familiar dynamics from your family of origin. This creates an echo chamber of mutual programming reinforcement. Everyone is helping everyone else maintain their inherited mental frameworks, while believing they're engaging in authentic thought and genuine relationship. You think you're choosing people who share your values, but you're actually choosing people who help you avoid questioning the values that were programmed into you. You think you're finding information that confirms your beliefs, but you're actually seeking information that helps you avoid examining where those beliefs came from. This isn't conscious or malicious. It's how the social programming system maintains itself. It uses your relationships and information consumption to reinforce the very patterns that it installed in the first place. Breaking free from social programming doesn't mean rejecting everything you learned from others. That's impossible and unnecessary. It means developing the ability to distinguish between inherited patterns and conscious choices. between programmed reactions and authentic responses. It means asking questions like, is this thought actually mine, or is it someone else's voice in my head? Am I believing this because I've examined it, or because it was installed before I could examine it? Am I choosing this relationship because it supports my growth, or because it feels familiar? But here's the paradox. Even your desire to think independently was probably programmed into you by someone who valued independent thinking. Even your rebellion against social programming might be following a script you learned from rebels in your environment. The programming goes so deep that even your attempts to escape it are often programmed responses. This isn't cause for despair. It's cause for humility about the complexity of consciousness and the difficulty of distinguishing between authentic self-expression and sophisticated social conditioning. The goal isn't to eliminate social programming, that's impossible. The goal is to become more conscious of it, so you can participate more actively in choosing which programs to run, which voices to listen to, and which inherited patterns actually serve your current life. But even this level of conscious participation in your own programming has limits, because the part of you that wants to be conscious and choose wisely is itself shaped by forces beyond your control. Your mind evolved to survive, not to be happy, and it treats contentment as a threat to your vigilance. Here's one of the most psychologically disturbing truths about human consciousness. Your mind is actively working against your happiness, not accidentally, not as a side effect of other processes, but systematically and intentionally. Your brain evolved to keep you alive in a dangerous world. And from its perspective, happiness is a luxury you can't afford, and contentment is a threat that could get you killed. Right now, even if your life is going well, your mind is scanning for problems. It's looking for threats that don't exist, creating worries about futures that may never happen, and generating dissatisfaction with circumstances that are actually quite good. This isn't a malfunction in your psychological system. It's the system working exactly as designed. Your ancestors, who sat around feeling satisfied and content, didn't pass on their genes. They were eaten by predators, starved during famines, or failed to compete for resources and mates. The humans who survived long enough to reproduce were the anxious ones, the vigilant ones, the ones who could never quite relax because they were always scanning for the next threat. You inherited their brains, and those brains are still running programs designed for survival. In an environment where letting your guard down could be fatal, this creates a profound mismatch between what your conscious mind wants, peace, happiness, contentment, and what your unconscious survival system believes you need, constant vigilance, perpetual dissatisfaction, and endless striving for more security, status, and resources. Watch how this plays out in your daily experience. You get a promotion at work, and instead of feeling satisfied, your mind immediately starts worrying about the additional responsibilities. You find a romantic partner who loves you, and instead of enjoying the connection, your brain starts scanning for signs that they might leave. You achieve a goal you've been working toward for years. Within days or weeks, the satisfaction fades, and you're focused on the next thing you need to accomplish. This isn't ingratitude or neurosis, it's evolutionary programming. Your survival system learned that satisfied humans are complacent humans, and complacent humans are dead humans. So it never lets you stay satisfied for long. It is constantly moving the goalposts, creating new problems to solve, generating fresh anxieties to motivate action. Your mind treats happiness like a drug that makes you dangerously unaware of threats. The moment you start feeling too content, too secure, too satisfied, your psychological system activates what we might call happiness sabotage protocols. Automatic processes designed to restore your vigilance by creating problems where none exist. You know this feeling? You're having a good day, feeling peaceful and content, and suddenly your mind presents you with something to worry about. Maybe it's a conversation you had weeks ago that you now interpret as potentially problematic. Maybe it's a bodily sensation that could be a sign of illness. Maybe it's a financial concern that technically exists, but wasn't bothering you until this moment of contentment. Your rational mind thinks these worries are just happening to you randomly, but they're actually being generated by a system that believes worry is necessary for survival. Your happiness sabotage system is throwing problems at your consciousness to make sure you don't get too comfortable. This extends beyond immediate concerns to your entire approach to life satisfaction. Your mind has internalized the belief that if you're not striving for something better, you're stagnating. If you're not somewhat dissatisfied with your current circumstances, you're not motivated to improve them. If you're too happy with what you have, you won't work hard enough to get more. So it maintains a constant baseline of dissatisfaction, not enough to make you miserable, but enough to keep you moving, striving, acquiring, achieving. It makes you believe that happiness is always just one more accomplishment, one more purchase, one more relationship milestone away from your current situation. But here's the psychological trap. Since this dissatisfaction is built into your operating system, no external achievement can permanently satisfy it. You're trying to solve an internal software problem with external hardware solutions. You're attempting to debug evolutionary programming with lifestyle changes. The promotion doesn't create lasting satisfaction, because your mind immediately recalibrates to treat your new status as the new baseline and starts pushing for the next level. The relationship doesn't create permanent security because your brain keeps scanning for threats to that security. The achievement doesn't generate ongoing fulfillment, because your survival system treats past accomplishments as irrelevant to current threats. This is why the happiness industry, self-help books, motivational speakers, lifestyle gurus can offer endless strategies for achieving contentment, but rarely produces people who are genuinely content. They're trying to create happiness in minds that are designed to resist happiness as a threat to survival. But understanding this sabotage system can actually be liberating, because it helps you stop taking your dissatisfaction so seriously. When you recognize that your mind is generating problems to keep you vigilant, you can begin to see those problems as evolutionary artifacts rather than accurate assessments of your actual situation. When your mind starts catastrophizing about potential futures, you can recognize this as your threat detection system running inappropriate protocols. When you feel restless and dissatisfied despite having everything you thought you wanted, you can understand this as ancient programming, rather than evidence that your life is actually lacking something essential. This doesn't mean ignoring real problems or becoming complacent about genuine issues. It means developing the ability to distinguish between actual threats that require your attention and manufactured anxieties that exist only to maintain your vigilance. You can learn to appreciate your happiness sabotage system for what it is: a sophisticated survival mechanism that kept your ancestors alive, while recognizing that most of its interventions are no longer necessary or helpful in your current environment. Your mind manufactures crises because a mind without problems feels purposeless and dies. What if I told you that many of the problems consuming your mental energy right now don't actually exist, not in the sense that they're unimportant to you, but in the sense that they were manufactured by a mind that needs problems to solve in order to feel useful and alive. Your brain is essentially a problem-solving machine. It evolved to identify threats, find solutions, overcome obstacles, and navigate challenges. But here's the psychological trap. When your external environment becomes too stable, when your survival needs are met, when your life becomes relatively problem-free, your mind doesn't celebrate and relax. Instead, it starts manufacturing problems to maintain its sense of purpose. A mind without problems to solve feels existentially threatened. It interprets peace as stagnation, stability as complacency, and contentment as a dangerous lack of vigilance. So it begins creating artificial crises to give itself something meaningful to work on. Right now, think about the problems occupying your mental space. How many of them are immediate concrete threats to your actual well-being? And how many of them are potential future scenarios, interpersonal complexities, or abstract concerns that exist primarily in your imagination? Your mind takes minor uncertainties and amplifies them into major anxieties. It takes small social awkwardnesses and transforms them into relationship crises. It takes manageable challenges and inflates them into overwhelming obstacles. It's not trying to torture you, it's trying to give itself important work to do. Watch this process in your daily life. You wake up feeling relatively peaceful, and within minutes, your mind presents you with a menu of concerns. That email you need to send, that conversation you need to have, that decision you need to make. None of these are emergencies, but your mind treats them with the urgency of survival situations, because it needs to feel needed. You solve one problem, and instead of feeling relief, you find yourself immediately focused on the next one. You clear your to-do list, and rather than enjoying the accomplishment, you start generating new items. You resolve a relationship conflict, and suddenly, you're hyper-aware of other potential areas of tension. This isn't neurosis or anxiety disorder, though it can manifest as those things. This is your problem-solving system doing what it was designed to do, ensuring that you always have meaningful challenges to address. But in a modern environment where genuine survival threats are rare, this system begins creating sophisticated pseudo-problems that feel completely real and urgent to your conscious mind, but are actually just your brain's way of staying engaged and purposeful. Consider how your mind handles interpersonal relationships. When things are going well with someone you care about, does your mind relax and enjoy the connection? Or does it start scanning for subtle signs of trouble, analyzing their tone of voice, interpreting their silences, creating meaning from their casual comments? Your problem creation engine takes the natural complexity of human relationships and transforms it into a never-ending source of puzzles to solve. What did they really mean by that? Why haven't they texted back yet? Are they acting differently than usual? Is there something they're not telling me? Most of these concerns have no basis in reality, but they serve a crucial psychological function. They give your mind something to work on. They create a sense of purpose and engagement that your brain craves but can't find in a stable, loving relationship. The same pattern applies to your career, your health, your finances, even your personal growth. Your mind takes areas of your life that are actually functioning quite well and finds ways to problematize them. It's not because there are genuine issues that need addressing, but because it needs issues to address. You get a clean bill of health from your doctor, and instead of feeling relieved, your mind starts noticing every minor physical sensation as a potential sign of something more serious. Your finances are stable, and rather than enjoying the security, You start worrying about economic scenarios that might threaten that stability. Your personal development is progressing nicely, and suddenly you're focused on all the ways you're still not good enough. This problem creation engine is so sophisticated that it can take genuine accomplishments and transform them into new sources of anxiety. You achieve something you've been working toward, and instead of satisfaction, you experience worry about whether you can maintain that level of performance. You receive recognition for your efforts, and rather than enjoying the appreciation, you start stressing about living up to the expectations that recognition creates. But here's the most psychologically twisted aspect of this system. It often creates problems by trying to prevent problems. Your mind becomes so concerned about potential future difficulties that it generates present moment anxiety about those possibilities. It creates current suffering in the name of preventing future suffering. You worry about your relationship ending, and that worry creates tension that actually threatens the relationship. You stress about financial security, and that stress interferes with your ability to make clear financial decisions. You anxiously try to control outcomes you can't actually control, and that anxiety becomes a bigger problem than the outcomes you were trying to prevent. Your problem creation engine doesn't just manufacture external concerns, it creates internal problems too. It takes natural human experiences like uncertainty, change, and complexity and frames them as problems that need to be solved, rather than realities that need to be navigated. It treats your emotions as problems to fix rather than information to consider. It sees your thoughts as chaos to organize rather than natural mental activity to observe. It views your personality as a project to improve rather than a dynamic process to understand. Understanding this engine can be both liberating and disturbing. Liberating because it helps you recognize that many of your problems exist primarily in your mind's need to have problems. Disturbing because it raises the question, if your mind is manufacturing many of your problems, how do you know which concerns are genuinely important and which are just psychological busywork? This is where developing what we might call problem literacy becomes crucial. The ability to distinguish between manufactured concerns and genuine issues, between your mind's need for stimulation and life's actual requirements for your attention. You've probably spent years trying to improve yourself, reading books about productivity, relationships, happiness, success, attending workshops, following programs, implementing systems designed to make you better, more effective, more fulfilled. You've identified your weaknesses, worked on your habits, optimized your routines, and pursued personal growth with the dedication of someone solving an important puzzle. But here's a psychologically disturbing question. What if the entire self-improvement project is just the most sophisticated form of the problem creation engine we've been exploring? What if your desire to fix, optimize, and enhance yourself is actually a way of maintaining perpetual dissatisfaction disguised as personal development? The self-improvement industry is built on a fundamental assumption that you as you currently are insufficient. That your natural way of being is somehow deficient and needs to be upgraded, corrected, or transformed. This assumption feels so obvious and reasonable that questioning it seems almost absurd. Of course you should try to improve yourself. Of course you should work on your flaws and develop your potential. But what if this assumption is creating the very dissatisfaction it promises to solve? When you approach yourself as a project to be improved, you're essentially declaring war on your current experience. You are saying that who you are right now isn't good enough, that your natural responses need to be modified, that your instinctive way of being requires correction. You're treating yourself like a broken machine that needs fixing rather than a dynamic, complex system that's already functioning. This creates a profound psychological split. Part of you becomes the improver, the one who identifies problems, creates solutions, and implements changes. Another part becomes the improved, the one who needs to be fixed, optimized, and enhanced. And this split ensures that you'll never feel truly satisfied with yourself, because there's always another level of improvement to pursue. Watch how this plays out in your own self-improvement efforts. You work on being more confident, and you make progress. But instead of feeling satisfied with that progress, you start noticing all the ways you're still not confident enough. You develop better habits, and they actually improve your life. But rather than enjoying those improvements, you begin focusing on the next set of habits you need to develop. You solve the problems you set out to solve, but the self-improvement mindset immediately generates new problems to work on. It's like a software program that's designed to find bugs. Even when you fix the current bugs, it keeps scanning for new ones to identify and address. This isn't accidental. The self-improvement industry needs you to remain perpetually dissatisfied in order to continue existing. If you ever felt truly content with yourself as you are, you'd stop buying books, attending seminars, and following programs. Your ongoing dissatisfaction is literally the product being sold, disguised as the solution to that dissatisfaction. But even more psychologically sophisticated is how self-improvement co-opts your natural growth processes. Humans naturally develop, learn, and adapt throughout their lives. You're constantly evolving in response to new experiences, challenges, and insights. This organic growth happens without effort or intention. It's just how consciousness works. But the self-improvement mindset takes this natural process and turns it into a project. It makes you believe that your organic development needs to be managed, optimized, and directed by conscious effort. It transforms spontaneous growth into effortful improvement, natural evolution into strategic enhancement. This creates a peculiar form of psychological tension. You start trying to control and direct processes that work better when left alone. You become self-conscious about natural responses that function more effectively when they're unconscious. You try to improve capacities that are already improving themselves through the simple process of living and experiencing. Consider how this affects your relationships. You read about communication skills, emotional intelligence, and healthy relationship patterns. You try to implement these concepts in your interactions with others. But the very act of trying to be a better partner, friend, or family member can make your relationships feel artificial and effortful rather than natural and spontaneous. You start monitoring your own behavior, analyzing your responses, and attempting to optimize your social interactions. But relationships work best when they flow naturally from genuine feeling and authentic response, rather than from conscious effort to apply learned techniques. The same pattern occurs with happiness, creativity, productivity, and virtually every other area of human experience that gets targeted for improvement. The more you try to optimize these natural capacities, the more self-conscious and artificial they become. But here's the deepest layer of the self-improvement trap. It's based on the assumption that you can step outside yourself and modify yourself from some objective, external perspective. It treats your consciousness like a computer program that can be debugged and upgraded by a programmer who stands outside the system. But you can't actually step outside yourself. The part of you that wants to improve is the same consciousness that you're trying to improve. You're using your mind to fix your mind, your psychology to optimize your psychology, your patterns to change your patterns. You're trying to lift yourself up by pulling on your own bootstraps. This creates an infinite regression of self-improvement. You try to improve yourself, then you notice that your improvement efforts aren't working perfectly. So you try to improve your improvement process. Then you notice that meta-improvement isn't working either. So you try to improve your relationship to improvement itself. Understanding this trap doesn't mean abandoning all efforts to grow or develop, but it does mean questioning the fundamental assumption that you need to be fixed, optimized, or enhanced. It means considering the possibility that your natural way of being might already be more functional and appropriate than you've been led to believe. What if instead of trying to improve yourself, you simply paid more attention to how you already are? What if instead of fixing your flaws, you became more curious about why those apparent flaws developed and what function they might serve? What if instead of optimizing your responses, you simply observed them with more awareness and less judgment? This shift from improvement to awareness, from fixing to understanding, from enhancement to acceptance, can be profoundly liberating. It can free you from the exhausting project of constantly trying to become someone better, and allow you to simply be who you already are, which might be far more interesting and capable than the self-improvement mindset has allowed you to recognize. But even this insight about the self-improvement trap has its limits. And recognizing those limits brings us to our final exploration. The question isn't whether you can escape these psychological patterns. The question is whether there's a different way to dance with them. Knowing about these mental tricks doesn't free you from them. It just makes you more sophisticated in how you're trapped. So here we are. At the end of our journey through the dark psychology your mind uses against you. You've learned about the illusion of control, the construction of reality, the manipulation of memory, the prison of personality, the hijacking of emotions, the deception of logic, the maze of motivation, the matrix of social programming, the sabotage of happiness, the engine of problem creation, and the trap of self-improvement. You now know things about your own consciousness that most people never discover. You can see psychological processes that were previously invisible. You understand mechanisms that were operating in the shadows of your awareness. But here's the final, perhaps most important psychological truth. This knowledge doesn't set you free. If anything, it reveals just how sophisticated and inescapable these mental processes really are. Right now, as you integrate what you've learned, your mind is already beginning to co-opt this information. It's taking these insights about psychological manipulation and turning them into new forms of psychological manipulation. It's using your awareness of mental tricks to play more subtle mental tricks. You've learned that your rational mind creates post hoc justifications for unconscious decisions. And now your rational mind is creating elaborate explanations for why this knowledge makes you different, more aware, more conscious than people who haven't heard these ideas. You've discovered that your personality is largely socially constructed. And already your mind is constructing a new identity around being someone who understands that personalities are constructed. You've recognized that your emotions are often evolutionary artifacts rather than accurate responses to current situations. And your mind is already using this recognition to create a sense of superiority over people whose emotions seem less sophisticated than your newly enlightened emotional awareness. This is the awareness paradox. The very consciousness that learns about its own limitations is the same consciousness that's limited. You can't step outside your psychological programming to observe it objectively, because the observer is part of the programming. You're using your mind to understand your mind. your patterns to recognize your patterns, your conditioning to see your conditioning. Every insight you gain becomes material for new forms of self-deception. Every level of awareness you achieve becomes a new place to get stuck. Every psychological trick you learn to recognize becomes a new way to trick yourself into thinking you're no longer being tricked. Watch this happening in real time. As you listen to these words about the awareness paradox, notice how your mind is already creating distance from the paradox. It's generating thoughts like, yes, but I can see this happening, so I must be somewhat outside of it, or this applies to other people more than it applies to me, or understanding this paradox is itself a form of transcendence. But these thoughts are just more programs running, more patterns executing, more psychological processes hiding their own operation. The mind that recognizes the awareness paradox is the same mind that's trapped within it. The consciousness that sees its own limitations is itself limited by what it can see. This creates an infinite regress of self-awareness. You become aware of your lack of awareness, then aware of your awareness of your lack of awareness, then aware of your awareness of your awareness of your lack of awareness. Each level feels like progress, but each level is just another layer of the same recursive process. Your mind will try to solve this paradox, to find a way out of the infinite loop, to discover some perspective that transcends the limitations of perspective itself. But that trying is just another program running, another pattern executing, another psychological process hiding its own operation. The seeking for freedom from psychological programming is itself psychological programming. The desire to transcend mental limitations is itself a mental limitation. The attempt to step outside the system is the system extending itself into new territory. But recognizing this isn't cause for despair. It's the beginning of a different kind of understanding, not the understanding that solves the paradox, but the understanding that sees the beauty in being permanently, inescapably, creatively trapped within the mystery of your own consciousness. Because maybe the question isn't how to escape these psychological patterns, but how to dance with them more gracefully. Maybe wisdom isn't about transcending the human condition, but about embracing it more fully. And maybe that embrace begins with a fundamental shift in how you relate to everything you think you know about yourself and your mind.